Oh,
All right, I think we are now live. So welcome everybody, and welcome to our ninth annual San Antonio Book Fair. I am so glad that we're here and we're back to celebrate books, writing, and storytelling. I am Annie Colonico, a local San Antonio book lover and high school teacher, here with Goldy Moldavsky and Rose Szabo to talk about their new books. Goldy Moldavsky was born in Lima, Peru, and grew up in Brooklyn, New York, where she lives with her family. She is the New York Times bestselling author of Kill the Boy Band and No Good Deed. Some of her influences include Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the esteemed works of John Irving and the Mexican telenovelas she grew up watching with her mother. The Mary Shelley Club is her latest book. Rose Szabo is a non-binary writer from Richmond, Virginia, where they live with an assortment of people and animals. They have an MA in English from the University of Maine and an MFA in creative writing from VCU. Their work has been published in See the Elephant and Quaint magazines. What Big Teeth is their first novel. We hope that you'll consider purchasing Goldy Moldavsky's The Mary Shelley Club and Rose Szabo's What Big Teeth from Nowhere Bookshop, the book festival's bookseller. And I'm sure you guys all know independent bookstores have had a really hard time during the pandemic, so we hope that you'll support them and our wonderful writers and the festival by purchasing their excellent books. Just click on the Buy the Book option on the festival site. We also would really love to have you guys be part of the conversation, and you can place your questions for the authors in the Q&A tab to the right of your screen. And we are really excited to be here, and thank you guys so much for being patient while we were working out some technical kinks. And so I wanted to get us started with just sort of a general question for both Rose and Goldy. And I was really curious as I was reading y'all's books, which, by the way, are so much fun, and I got so into them and couldn't stop talking about it with the people around me. And I was curious, what drew both of you to writing young adult horror in particular?
okay, I'll go first. First of all, I'm really happy to be here. I'm sorry for the long wait. It was all my fault. Technical difficulties. I am very old and I'm not good with computers or phones, apparently. But anyway, we're here. Great. What drew me to writing horror? It's a good question. I have always loved horror since I was a little kid, which is weird to say, but yeah, since I was little, I would go to the video store. I know I'm dating myself, but there were video stores back then, and I would go to the horror aisle and just pick them all out and watch them with my sister, and that's how we grew up. But I wouldn't say my book is necessarily a horror book. I don't know if it's that scary. I didn't go into it wanting to scare people. To me, it was more about fear. It was kind of horror adjacent. It more studies the element of horror, what it means when we consume it, and why do we consume it. And I didn't really know the answer to that question until I was done writing the book, really. With my main character uses horror as a sort of balm for her life. She went through a really traumatic experience, and she has a lot of anxiety. She has PTSD, and so she uses horror movies as a sort of self-care therapy, catharsis for herself, where she sees that this is the only way that she really knows how to control fear. If she sits down and watches an hour-and-a-half movie and she can close it up, well, it's not a book, but she can shut it off and it's done. She can get, through with her fear and then go on with her life. And I realized I think a lot of people deal with horror in that way too, where they want it where it could be easily consumed and easily stored away. And I think that's what really drew me to the genre, basically.
God, Goldie, you're so brave. Watching horror movies when you're little, I was in my 20s before I was able to watch horror movies. I watched The Exorcist and I slept with the lights on for the next 8 months.
Yeah, I got through with that when I was like 6, so I got it out of the way early.
Yeah, I feel like I came to horror from almost an opposite place. I was an extremely scared child. I was afraid of chickens. I was afraid of strange adults. I was afraid of the family dog. And so I think like I developed this like attitude of like, okay, I'm gonna like test myself. I'm going to like push myself to like do and experience things that are scary to me. And in doing so, I eventually like, you know, over the course of my life developed like this really high tolerance for like scary movies and horror, but it took me a long time, and it very much came out of that like that feeling of constantly being scared and being like mad at myself for being scared. And I feel like the book What Big Teeth is very much about someone who is in a similar place, who's like very scared but is like frustrated by that and wants to overcome her fears.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you guys both address like a big part of what I noticed in both of y'all's books is exactly what you were both talking about, is that for both of your protagonists, they're dealing with trauma and, you know, fear in different ways. And I was curious about how you see writing and books and movies as a way for us, especially, you know, during this pandemic when we're all experiencing trauma. How do you see both your work and other, you know, pieces of fiction, whether that's film or books, as a way for us to explore and process trauma?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I'll try first. I feel like fiction, when it's done right, teaches us how to survive. Like you read about these really, you know, extraordinary or terrible things happening to other people, and you have like this map in your head for like what this is going to be. You know, I had a friend this summer who had a really traumatic experience, but it was something that she knew how to expect because she had like she's an activist, and she'd like talked to other activists who had been through a similar experience. And she said like it wasn't nearly as scary as I thought it would be because I'd had like people tell me about it and know what to expect. And I think fiction does the same thing for us to a certain extent. It prepares us, even if it's, you know, even if you're never going to meet a werewolf in real life. You know, having a model for like how to behave when you know, don't feel safe around your family is something really useful. I remember A Series of Unfortunate Events being a really powerful book for a lot of people that I knew, because it was like a book that told you, no, it's okay not to trust adults. It's okay to be scared of adults and to like fight adults if they're treating you badly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, Rose makes a really good point. With my book, I just think I was trying to get the point across where, yeah, it's so easy to like consume that horror when it's outside of your life and not having to deal with it when it's like your reality. It's sort of just escapism where there's too much horror. It's way too unbearable. It's just one thing on top of the other that we're dealing with this year, especially, or last year, where you just want to get away from it and experience a type of horror, at least, that isn't based in reality necessarily, you know, and that's just a easier pill to swallow, I think, you know. And once you know how to deal with that horror, maybe you can deal with the stuff in your life, like, and see it in a new light and deal with it in a better way, I would hope. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're both right. It's interesting how we use stuff around us as a way to process things. And I find I've talked to a lot of people during the pandemic that are readers that had a really hard time reading, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. And it's only been in the last few months that they've been able to get back into it, and it's been a way for them to process. So I appreciate both of y'all's thoughts on that topic. To get a little bit more into each of y'all's books, we're going to start by talking a little bit more about the Mary Shelley Club, which this cover, both of you guys have amazing covers. Like, they're fantastic. With the Mary Shelley Club,
best cover of any book that came out last year. I'm so jealous of what they did for your book. I mean, look at that thing. It's a work of art.
The artist is my hero forever. Like, just absolutely
so
amazing.
One, especially like the more you get into the novel itself and the story, the more you're like, oh, this is the perfect cover for this. Um, so with the Mary Shelley Club, as I said earlier, I'm a high school teacher. And so, Goldie, I was curious about how you see high school and why you feel like high school is such a good setting for a thriller and kind of getting into that like scary content. So tell me like how you chose the setting that you did.
Sure, yeah. Well, the way I see high school and I guess adolescence in particular is that you're always inside your head for a lot of the time. It's not a point of your life where you're necessarily talking to people about what you're experiencing. I feel like that's something that you do more when you're like in your 20s and 30s, when you realize, okay, other people are going through this. It's normal, we're all kind of weird. We've all got our own little idiosyncrasies. But when we're teenagers, I feel like you experience one thing and you think, oh my God, I'm a freak. No one else is going through this. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. Like, it's all very internal and in your head, and you think there's something really wrong with you. And I think that's really something that's going on with my main character, Rachel, who from the start of the book, she thinks she's a monster, basically. And she thinks there's a darkness inside of her, like nobody will ever look at her and see just a normal person. And that's why I think really writing for teens is something that, first of all, it's so special to be able to talk to them and tell them you're not alone. There's nothing wrong with you. Everyone has a little bit of darkness, and that's okay. And that's what she finds in the Mary Shelley Club itself. She finds other people who are also kind of twisted and kind of dark, and she sees that they're having fun with it, and it's actually kind of okay until it's not okay. But that's much later in the book. But yeah, I think that's why it's so great writing for teenagers, because teenagers are like experiencing these things, for the first time, and you get to tell them, everyone goes through this and it's okay. And yeah, that's why I chose it.
I love it. And I love what you do with that setting and with like bringing in the aspects of what it is to be a student in a high school, but also like in that time of your life. And I think you did a fantastic job there.
I also chose, thank you. I chose the Upper East Side also because I did not grow up on the Upper East Side. I grew up in Brooklyn, and that lifestyle was nothing like my own lifestyle, but I was always obsessed with like bad NYC rich kids. So I decided I needed to write it.
Yeah. And I get the love of Brooklyn that comes through your novel. And it's not, big blaring neon signs, but there's an affection for Brooklyn that really comes through in your writing, and that kind of serves to separate between where Rachel lives and then also, where she goes to school.
Yeah, I don't think I can set a book outside of New York, not because I don't want to, but just because I feel like the life outside of New York is so different. Just even the way people talk, like in New York we say soda, and I know that in other parts of America you say pop. If I set my book in Texas, I would have to like remember that like they might drink pop and they might use
we call it Coke.
Right.
All sodas are Coke.
Or tennis shoes. We wear sneakers. Other people wear tennis shoes. So I wouldn't be able to do it just for that alone.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one of the other things that's really prominent in the Mary Shelley Club, and you mentioned this earlier, is the kind of immersive aspect of the club and getting into horror films, and the club's activities as well as the book itself kind of play around with some of the common tropes in horror films and references a lot of scenes and characters from like what I would consider like classic horror. And you've already said like that you're a fan of horror movies, and I'm just curious, like what horror tropes do you find both kind of like the most annoying, the ones that you're like, oh, this again, and the ones that you're like, oh, I love it when they do that?
Oh man, I like all the tropes. I think my favorites are when there's a little kid with really long hair, or just little kids in general. Just little kids in a horror movie. They don't belong in horror movies.
Creepy.
What are they doing there? You know? They're so creepy. Just thinking of like Nightmare on Elm Street and those little kids playing jump rope. It's so innocent outside of the setting of Nightmare on Elm Street. But when it's Nightmare on Elm Street, it's the creepiest thing that you can possibly imagine. So I love that trope. And the ones that I don't like, I don't know, I love them all. I like them all. I think that you can always reinvent them. And that's kind of what I was trying to do with the book, turn them on their head.
Yeah, and I think we do that.
I always try to see if they're successful, if they can reinvent the classic tropes, because they're there for a reason. Every genre has their tropes, and you gotta love them.
Yeah, and you're right. Little kids in horror movies are so sinister. Doesn't matter what they're doing. You're just like, what's wrong with this little kid?
Why are you there? Yes.
Yeah. And Rose, your book kind of addresses that too. I know maybe not intentionally, but you kind of play with that idea too of like children being a little sinister, and the aspect of family and childhood and growing up and getting into figuring out who you are. And I'm curious about like how I found myself writing a lot of notes about like speculating what the different family members in your book were, so to speak. And I really like that you are playing with like this idea of like kind of ambiguous identity with some of your characters. And I was curious about what drove you to make some characters' identities more clear than others.
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think I would be, leaving something out if I didn't talk about the Addams family, where, some of the people are like clearly some particular type of monster. And then other people are just like, is Morticia a monster or is she just a goth?
Right? That's a good question.
That's a great question.
Like,
is it a fashion choice?
Yeah, and so, I mean, I also think that, in real families, there's this sort of like spiraling web of resemblances and traits that get passed on. And it's not always like clear, like why some particular family member is so much like another one and someone else is so different. But those things really do influence the way that family dynamics go. Like, my little brother looked almost exactly like my grandfather when he was young. And so that made him like very precious and special. It was like they had the same ears and everything. And so I wanted to sort of explore that a little bit and like, what does it mean to be in a family where there are some people who have like a very sort of like distinct and charismatic monstrousness, like they're these beautiful, sleek, frightening werewolves. And, some of the other family members are just like, a cranky woman who doesn't talk very much. And like, what does that create in terms of hierarchy, or how do they relate to one another?
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the cranky lady who doesn't talk very much, because Margaret, I think, might be my favorite member of the family. And she didn't become my favorite until towards the end, but I was like, oh my gosh, Margaret's amazing. And I'm just curious, like, was she inspired by somebody particular in your life?
I mean, I suppose like a number of different things. I try not to like pull from any one person or influence, obviously. I think about her in terms of like Lurch from the Addams Family, although there are other characters who are also Lurch-like in various different ways. And also, I suppose a little bit my godmother, who is like this very like stoic and no nonsense woman who mostly just like spends time by herself, but like, who has like this. And, when I was growing up, I think like that was sometimes like described to me as sad, but I always thought that like she was like very glamorous and brave and cool for being willing to just like, live by herself with her like several dogs. Like she knew exactly what she wanted and didn't want it, and she wasn't going to put up with anything that she didn't want. And I thought that was just the height of fashion.
Yeah, and there's definitely, like, you're describing her, and she does sound a lot like some of the characteristics of Margaret and her very, this is how things are going to be done
Hmm.
approach to things. Um, One other thing I have to ask because, well, Rose, you set the book in Maine, and I think all of us who are fans of horror know that Maine seems to be a really popular setting for horror. And I'm just curious, I've never been to Maine.
Hmm.
What makes Maine such a good setting for like horror and creepy and weirdness?
So, yeah, I feel like I lived in Maine for 2 years and I left still feeling like an outsider, which I think is
Mm.
like really normal for the Maine experience.
Hmm.
I think it's very cold and there's this real sense that like the elements can kill you. Like I remember walking to the convenience store like to buy laundry detergent in the snow and realizing that it was like it was so still and quiet and the store was so far away and it was cold enough that like my tears were like frozen on my face and I was like, "Oh, no one knows where I am. I could just die out here. Like it's
Oh
entirely
no.
possible." And I think that like makes the and I think that makes
Wow.
the people who live there like very like resilient in some ways, but also like very very suspicious of anybody who lives somewhere warmer before they came there because they're like too soft and like will they survive the winter? Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so I think that's part of it. Like there are a lot of like very small towns. There's a lot of stuff that like hasn't changed or been updated since like the 1960s. Like there's a lot of um, sort of like decaying infrastructure, and I feel like
Mm.
that was really what stuck with me is the sense that like the people who stay there have been living in much the same way for a very long time and aren't super you know, aren't super interested in changing. And so I could very much see them living in a small fishing village and just being like, well, yes, there are monsters at the top of the hill, but as long as they don't bother us, it's not a problem.
Yeah, I've lived in a small town before, and like that really resonated with me where there's that sense of we're not going to bother them, and as long as they don't bother us, everything's fine. We're ignoring all the eccentricities and just letting it be. And that, but also knowing each other's business, like that dichotomy was very small town for me. And I was like, oh, this reminds me of my life in a small town.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a small town person, so like it was very alien and creepy to me, but in this way that I found like absolutely fascinating.
No, I agree with you. I grew up in cities for the most part, and I live in cities. And so, same, living in a small town for 2 years, it was actually kind of like a horror movie itself in some respects. So yeah, I really like that you kind of play with that within What Big Teeth and that aspect of like this I don't want to say the village, I guess, because that's not really, it's a little bit bigger than that, but the town being invited in at certain points and like that interplay of the family and the town and that kind of uncomfortableness between them was really well done.
Yeah, I love that scene where they all show up because they've been invited and it would be rude not to come, but every single one of them brings like something that they could like fight with, like an umbrella or a
Yes.
walking stick. And then the family like not knowing how to react to Jello because like Jello,
Yeah.
like they like kill and eat things in the woods, but like Jello is a bridge too far.
I kind of have to agree with them actually. Keep the jello away.
No, it's
Um,
not my favorite.
no, no. Um, so you guys, have addressed this in pieces, so a little bit so far, and I think that all things that we create, whether that's books or pieces of visual art or you know comedy sets, like it's always influenced by our background and our individual experiences. And I'm curious about how you personally see your background and your individual experiences of life shaping your work and your approach to writing.
Hmm. Well, I typically don't like to put myself in my work too much. Like you said, I think my work is more a product of everything that I've consumed everything that I've been influenced by, rather than like me putting myself on the page. There are some similarities between me and my main character. I mean, we're both really anxious, kind of neurotic, nervous people. So I could write those scenes with some authenticity, I hope. But other than that, I think that's why most of my work, I think, has a through line of comedy to it. Because I think comedy is kind of an easy way to be a little bit at a distance, you know, and you crack a joke and then you're not that vulnerable. You don't have to put yourself out there too much. And so that's what I think I give to my characters too. Like, I didn't set out to write a funny book with this one, with the Mary Shelley Club, but a lot of like the reviews I've read have been, oh, it was kind of humorous. Oh, it was, you know, this was a humorous book. It's a funny book. And that wasn't my intention at all. But now I realize, oh, like just the way my characters talk to each other, just by the dialogue itself, it's like everyone's cracking jokes. And I guess that's a way of putting myself in the book, you know, making them all like that, and just that we're all trying to be funny because we're too scared to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So that's me putting myself in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like get you about like the mixing horror and humor. I feel like for me, everything that I write is like me like making little collages and like cutting and pasting like things from real life and things that I've read and weird dreams that I've had. Um, uh, my mother of like everybody in your dream is you. So like whatever your interpretation you're coming up with for your dream, it's you. And so I mean, I guess like to a certain extent, like everything in my book is me, but also not, you know, like it's my interpretation of things that I've like heard or seen or felt. I feel like my main character also is very much like some of the parts of myself that I really didn't like at the time. Like, you know, the part of me that was like very, very like judgmental of other people and very much desiring to control things, but also being very jealous of other people for what I felt that they had that I did not. That's like a recurring theme with Eleanor. There's a scene where her sister says, like, you know, you bit me when you were little, and she's got like a scar from where like her seemingly human sister bit her. And Eleanor remembers that what it was is that her sister's baby teeth had fallen out and she'd gotten like beautiful fangs. And she was so mad that her sister had gotten fangs that she'd like bit her. And that's like very much the essence of like a negative trait of mine that I've had to sort of work to absorb successfully.
Who among us hasn't bit our sister, though?
I mean, yeah, biting your siblings, I think, is just a normal part of childhood. I hope.
Self-defense, right? Yeah, and I think it's interesting how, you know, Eleanor, her approach to things is very keeping people at a distance, at the same time that she really wants to belong. And in both of y'all's books, Rachel and Eleanor are both kind of seeing themselves as being outsiders or misfits that are trying to like kind of, you know, find their people, and they have some mixed results with that. And kind of like segueing from what Rose was just talking about, like, how do you think that need to belong shapes your protagonists and the choices that they're making in the books?
Well, yeah, it completely shapes everything Rachel does. I mean, she starts off the book so lonely and feeling so out of place. She's in a new town, a big city, out of the suburbs. She's in a new school. She only has one friend. She feels, like you said, like a misfit, like a total fish out of water. So when she meets this group of people, the Mary Shelley Club, I think she's happy to finally find her people. But even though she might not realize it, there's an element of peer pressure in everything she does with them. I mean, in her mind, she's thinking, I totally love this. This is like totally my speed. I'll play this game. I like the same thing that you guys like. But really what they're doing, the game they're playing is really twisted and kind of cruel. And I think she talks herself out of that because she has this newfound family and it's really all she is, all she was looking for. And now that she finally has them, she'll do whatever she can to really fit in and belong with them. And for a while, it's fun and it works out. And then that catches up with her and she realizes that she's way in over her head and what they're doing is really, really wrong. And I think a lot of people find themselves in situations like that, especially teenagers. I mean, we all know that peer pressure is a big deal.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could say she found friends, but they're not necessarily the best group of people in the end.
Yeah, I think Eleanor's desire to come or to belong comes from this idea that she has that she's like relatively powerless compared to her family, and that the reason that they, initially sent her to boarding school in her own mind is like maybe because she wasn't good enough or because she like she doesn't know exactly, but it's connected in her mind to this idea that she's like not as powerful as everyone else. And so a lot of her attempts to fit in are about like shaping the family to suit her, like trying to find ways to gain control over what she feels is like an uncontrollable situation. And I'm going to try not to spoil it, but what she doesn't realize is that she is in fact, incredibly powerful and dangerous in ways that her family is not, and that part of what she has to learn how to do is like accept who she is and temper her own power in relation to other people. She was always one of them. She just didn't understand in what ways.
Yeah, and that's a very powerful part of the book when she realizes who she is and how she fits with the family. And I'm hoping that our readers will get a chance to experience that moment themselves in reading your book. Another question I have for both of you is, and this is something that I know that Goldy brought this up a little bit earlier, that both Eleanor and Rachel express fear about like who they are and worry about what they're capable of doing, and sometimes think of themselves as monsters. Although in the case of Eleanor, at first she doesn't think she's a monster, but she's also afraid of what she's done in the past. And I'm curious about why you think that, or how do you think that this resonates with readers, especially our teen readers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super normal to feel like a monster, especially when you're a teenager. Young adulthood is just full of like all kinds of like terrifying shifts, particularly in like the family and how you relate to your family members. You're suddenly this like really autonomous person. You suddenly have like all these new capabilities and responsibilities, and your family, which maybe previously seemed all powerful, may start to seem really vulnerable. I can remember, coming back from college and my parents suddenly looked like older and smaller. And that was like, very, very frightening. I think for Eleanor, like a lot of her story is about like no longer being in denial of the ways that she is a monster. And rather than, learning to see herself as not one, learning how to accept what's monstrous about her and live with it.
Yeah.
I think it's so easy to latch on to the negative thoughts, which are so much louder than any good thing that you could be hearing in your own head. Like, yeah, my main character thinks she's a monster, and she's listening to that voice that's so loud that she can't even like hear the other voice. It's like, you're capable of like so many great things. And I feel like teenagers are like that too. And we're like, teenagers are really powerful beings. They have multitudes within them, as the quote goes.
They do.
But yeah, they only listen to the dark, that like, that nagging little voice where, they have to realize that there's so much more to them. It's not just that small part, that part could be there. They're not necessarily monsters, but they're individuals with, a lot of different parts to them. They just have to rein in, see where they can focus the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both the Mary Shelley Club and What Big Teeth leave things sort of open-ended at the end of the book, like so much horror does, right? Like that's like kind of the hallmark of so many horror movies, is that you're left going, wait, what is there more? What's going to happen next? And I'm just curious, like, what are the odds that we're going to see more of Rachel or more of Eleanor in the future?
I feel like there might be a second book, but I don't think Eleanor is the protagonist of it.
Okay.
I feel like there's other stories to tell in this world, and I'm starting to think about them a little bit, but I'm trying not to get ahead of myself because I have other books I promised somebody I would write first, sadly.
Yeah. With this book, it's interesting. With my other two books, I never really thought about what happened to the characters after the story was over. I felt like those were really only existed in that book, and once you turn the cover, it's done. But with this one, like you said, it is a little bit of an open ending. And actually, in the British version of the book, my editor didn't like how open the ending was. And she asked if I would close it up a little bit. And I obliged. Because I like the idea. I like the idea of having two different versions of the story floating around. Why not? But it's not like a radical difference. It's not like I changed who the big bad guy is. It's just a few words, basically the last paragraph. But yeah, I left it a little open because it's my hope that I could write another one, but the publishing business, it's a business, and really the readers will have to dictate if I get to write another book or not. But I have a little notebook where I jot down all my ideas for the characters who survived the story. And I hope to play around with them, but we'll see. Who knows?
It's exciting for both of you. That's fantastic. I would love to see more of both of y'all's characters, and but I do understand, the publishing business and also like the need to get other stories out as well. Like that's a huge part of
that
it.
That is a big need. There's like all these ideas warring inside my head, and it's like, who do I give my attention to? Because it takes so long, it takes like a year to get the book out, and you really have to decide who you're going to give your attention to, who's worthwhile.
Yeah, whose voices get to come out.
Yeah.
We have a few audience questions, and audience, if you would like to ask questions, feel free to drop those questions into the Q&A. Jen is asking for both authors, do you have a favorite subgenre in horror, such as slashers, psychological horror, creature features, and so forth?
Okay, I think for me it's possession. Like demonic possession stories. I mean, I told you The Exorcist creeped me out so bad I couldn't sleep with the lights off for like a year. It's become my absolute favorite. I feel like there's something really, it's so often like a young woman, and like simultaneously, like she like is horrified at what's happening to her, but also like gets to do and say all of these things that she would ordinarily never let herself do and say. And I'm like fascinated by that. I feel like I would love to write like a demon book, but I'm not really sure how that one's going to go yet.
That's a good one. For me, it's more the psychological horror. Like, I think it's so easy to do a jump scare. I think, everyone does those. But where you just focus on like one setting and nothing is really happening, but it's still so unsettling, and there's that feeling of dread. I don't know how anyone does that. I tried to do it in my book with certain scenes. I don't know if it came across, who knows, but I think that's such a talent. For me, like the scariest movie to not watch is The Shining. I put it off for so long because even just the camera angles in that movie, those are meant to evoke fear. So I put it off until I was drafting this book, and I had to sit down with the curtains up in the daytime to finally watch that, because there's just something about how just the camera on the characters' faces are just like slowly panning in. That's just so creepy and unsettling. To me, that's really special. That's really fun to me.
It is.
That's my fave.
Awesome. Well, and I feel like some of the possession films do that too. Like they it's so unsettling because you're like, wait, what's happening? And yeah. we have another audience question. This is a question I was going to ask as well. And so Erica is asking, what are your favorite horror novels and or movies?
Ooh, I have a list of movies. Like we said, The Exorcist, The Omen, Us. I loved Us. It Follows, The Babadook, A Tale of Two Sisters, The Ring. Those are just some of the ones I really like. Rose?
Well, you just listed most of the ones I really like, so now I want to watch The Tale of Two Sisters because I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I know. I'm writing that down right now.
Yeah, gosh. I feel like the book Rebecca really did it for me. There was something like just really like unsettling about that. The movie The Descent is probably like the most really compelling horror movie I've ever watched because it's just so like it's so much about the characters, and they're like all of these women, and they get themselves into that mess, but you can totally understand how they got themselves into that mess. Like every single part of it is about like how their sort of friendships, like toxic group dynamic, gets them into a position where they're like trapped underground, like fighting monsters that they can't see. It's it messed me up.
Film.
So good.
So good. So upsetting.
Yeah, the ending is so upsetting to that movie.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
That's so good.
They made a second one, and I'm like really I haven't been able to bring myself to watch it because like what if it makes it bad?
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't watched the second one either. Same reason.
It was the only way that movie could end, was that way.
Yeah.
You know, the ending was inevitable.
Yeah, like opening it back up just doesn't make that much sense to me.
Well, we definitely want to keep those caves closed.
Yeah.
So this is a question, these are two questions that I have completely ripped off from one of my favorite podcasts, and I am curious about what do you love most about being a writer, and what do you dislike the most about being a writer? And you can choose what order you want to answer those in.
What I love most is the idea stage. I know that's not the typical answer. I should probably say meeting readers and getting fan mail, but I don't meet a lot of readers and I don't get a lot of fan mail. So it's the idea stage when it's fresh in your mind. That's when you're most passionate about the story, you know? And it's when it's when the idea is the best it'll ever be. I think it's when it's the shiniest. It's just this diamond in your mind. Because then when you start writing, it becomes the coal. It's kind of like a reverse process there where it just gets really bad and you're in the muck. And then even when you're done with the story, you still remember when like going through it and how horrible and hard it was. So for me, it's the idea stage. That's the best. Yeah, and the worst? Oh man, God, I never liked launching my books. just because I'm so nervous all the time and kind of antisocial that I would, and I don't like having a party for myself. So just the book launch itself, not launching a book, I shouldn't say that. I love getting the book out there, but like having an in-person launch event is the most nerve-wracking thing, and I could never have fun at one of my own launches. I love going to other people's launches for sure, and like making friends and talking to them. But when I have a party that's thrown for myself, no, no. They asked me if I wanted to do a launch event, and I couldn't even do a virtual launch event. I said, no, thank you. I'm good. I'll do events, but not if it's all about me. No way. So, yeah.
I absolutely admire you for like not being like, I don't know, the incredibly self-centered person I am. My friends were very kind to me. They threw me like a virtual launch party where they like got one of those like "It's a Boy" banners, but like took off the Y and put "okay," so it said "It's a book."
That's awesome.
No, it was very sweet. Let's see. I feel like the best part is when I'm writing my way along and I like surprise myself. Like when I come to like a twist and like I actually am like discovering the twist as I'm writing. Like I don't really outline, which my editor had some words with me about like earlier this year. Um, but my favorite part is when I get to be the person who's like, and they were roommates. And then like also the person going, my God, they were roommates. Like when I get to be shocked by what I just wrote or am still writing, that's so good. What's the worst? I feel like the worst is like trying to like interact with other authors on the internet. Like I love getting to meet people in these panels because I get to like actually like, hear you and see you and get a little bit of your personality. When I'm on Twitter, like trying to make Twitter friends, I feel like I'm in middle school and it's just abominable. Like I didn't have anybody to like ask to be on my panel at the launch event. So I asked someone who I didn't know that well, and she was wonderful and her book is great. And like, she was very sweet to me about it. But it very much felt like, oh, I don't have any friends. And that isn't a feeling that I've had for, in my adult life for a while. So it's been nerve wracking. So if anyone wants to be Twitter friends and you're nice, please just at me.
Oh, man.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I can agree. That's so hard.
Oh,
Especially
right?
YA Twitter. It is like high school for sure.
And like you're trying to like be friendly and funny, but you don't like know that person's sense of humor and like, are you going to sound weird?
Yeah. I still
That's so
think about
hard.
like that I did like months later. I'm like, was that insulting to them? Did I sound sarcastic when I was being sincere? Like it's so hard to tell over the internet, for sure.
Someone was
Definitely.
complimenting me on my book, and I thought they were complimenting me on the cover because I'd gotten so many back-to-back emails and tweets about like the cover because everyone loved it. And so I was like, yeah, it's a fantastic cover, isn't it? And he was like, oh, no, no, I mean like the book. I read it. And I was just like, oh, well, that's a person where as soon as I'm able to buy them a drink in person, I guess I have to.
You're like, oh yes, that too. Thank you. Oh yeah, internet.
Oh, yeah, the thing I wrote.
Speaking of covers, so I don't know enough about like the book publishing business to know the answer to this, so I apologize if this is a stupid question. But, we've talked about how fantastic What Big Teeth's cover is, and I love the cover for the Mary Shelley Club as well, and especially like the closer you get to it, the more detail you see. And I'm curious, like, what's the process? Like, how does this happen? Like, do you have a say in the covers? Like, do you get to like approve? Like, how does it happen? I'm curious.
I want to hear from Rose first. I'm curious.
Okay.
I'm curious because your cover is so good. I just wrote emails like, could we get something like Rose's cover for my cover? That's all I
Really?
want. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm curious to know about your cover.
For this first one, I feel like the editorial team had like a really strong idea about what they wanted to do. Like they wanted this to be like an individual portrait, and they wanted the sort of they wanted like some kind of like splash or exposure of the teeth. The artist, Corey Brickley, is absolutely fantastic. Like so much love. They're doing my second cover as well. And they actually like did like a few different cover mock-ups, and there's an even scarier one. Like there's one where like there's more of the like picture like ripped away, and like the teeth aren't all in like the right places. And like, yeah, honestly, I was like pretty mad about that one, but apparently like the focus group wouldn't come out from under the couch where they were hiding when they saw that one. I've had a lot of people say like that this is like a really scary cover, and I mean, I don't think that. I think it's, you know, really beautiful, but
Yeah,
you know,
it's
again,
beautiful.
my tolerance may be higher.
Yeah. It's very arresting, and that's, you know, that's kind of the thing that drew me to it. I literally will stare at covers for long chunks of time and just see more and more in them. And like I said, like,
Great way to judge the book.
yeah. And I know it's terrible, right? Like to judge a book by its cover, but like I'm totally drawn. I'm a cover sucker. Like I will totally just fall for cover art. And then the books.
Yeah, I was really lucky to actually have a lot of input in the cover. We got a lot of concept art and a lot of different ideas for what it would be. They wanted it to be photorealistic, and I was okay with that. And then, when they showed me the final version, I actually had some tweaks, and they were really receptive to that. Like the font of the title, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I asked them if they could change it a little bit. It was kind of more of a like a cookie cutter font.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to be more like flashy and like, you know, someone had written it out. Yeah, that knife was a surprise when I saw it. That was really cool. So yeah, I feel really lucky with my team that, you know, they're open to my suggestions, which is really not usually the case for writers at all. We really don't have a say usually when it comes to covers. So I felt really good about that.
Awesome. Yeah, like I said, I had no idea how that worked. So I had so many questions. I was like, how does this happen? We have another comment from an author, from one of our audience members. Di says, I need more of the Mary Shelley Club, especially after it broke my heart. I need it repaired now. And I agree, like with no spoilers, but yeah, like the reveal, you're just like, and
like Rose said, it's a really great moment when you figure out the twists, because you know you're the first audience for it to sell, and it has to work for you. You know, it has to work for you. If it doesn't work for you, it's not going to work for anybody else. And then you're by yourself for the entire process. That you need to be your own best audience for it. So I'm sorry, Di, that it broke your heart. Like I said, hopefully enough people pick it up. I would love to get back into the story and write another one, but it is not up to me. I'm not that powerful in this business to demand another book. Someone has to do that for me.
Well, hopefully your readers will get on that for you, because for both of you, because both of y'all's books deserve a follow-up if you choose to do one.
Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you to our authors, Rose and Goldy, as well as our audience, and to the San Antonio Book Festival for making sure that we could have this conversation. And again, I really hope that you will help support our authors and our independent bookstore, Nowhere Bookshop, by choosing to purchase the books through Nowhere Bookshop, which you can do by clicking on the Buy the Book button on the festival site. And again, here are these amazing books with their amazing covers. And I hope that you all will get a chance to read them and enjoy them. They are fantastic. And I really appreciated getting a chance to talk with both of y'all today. So thank you guys for being here.
Thank you, Addie. Thank you, guys.